Good morning, everybody. I'm Stephanie, your host for this session on carbon removal. This is Paris, and it's the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. We promised not to exceed the plus 1.5 degree limit. Well, welcome to the worst case. In Central Europe, we've even crossed 2.5%. All the talk about decarbonization tricks you into thinking that we are on a good way. Well, I need to tell you, we're not. We're still producing an enormous amount of extra heat, and we dump it into this thin layer that we call atmosphere. This extra heat is equivalent to the heat of 500,000 nuclear bombs of the Hiroshima type every single day. All the talk about the year 2050, the year when we allegedly go net zero, tricks you into thinking that there is still time. Well, let me tell you something. The tipping points don't care about our timeline. Every time I stand in front of an audience, I have to update the data. Scientists have seen temperatures on the land and in the oceans increase dramatically over the last 2 years. Seems like the Earth is losing its resilience, its ability to absorb all the carbon, all the extra heat, all the other kinds of pollution. What we have seen in the last 2 years is beyond any linear projection. Welcome to the exponential era. So you can now leave the room desperate, or you can stay with us and think about solutions that we can scale exponentially. And for that, we need a wholly new view on carbon. It's not enough to think about decarbonization. It's just not working. It's just not good enough. We need to understand the entire carbon cycle. We need to understand where carbon is good. I mean, you and I, we're made of carbon. Can't be that bad. But in many cases, it is bad. We have to understand where we can reduce, where we can remove. And a good manager today should be a carbon manager. So we find ourselves in a world which is basically divided into two activities, two kinds of companies. The ones that emit carbon and the ones that remove it. Which side do you want to be on? Is it okay for you just to become a little less bad, or do you want to be good? It is mind-blowing, all the new and old methods that we have to remove carbon. The tech-based ones, the nature-based ones, and everything in between. You will learn about them in the next hour. I'm lucky enough to be on the board of a leader in carbon removal, which is called Nature Capital. We restore ecosystems at scale, and we do that in Brazil and in Colombia, the two countries with the richest biodiversity on Earth. For me, carbon removal is the most underappreciated, underrated solution that we have. And learning about it opens up a whole new world of innovation, of business opportunities, of fun, by the way, and of hope. We have a great lineup today, and I invite you to listen, to learn. Hello, Frederick. Thanks for being here. This is Frederick, everybody. He's coming late, but he knows a thing or two about carbon. But we're now starting with a brilliant mind, to say the least. Eli Mitchell-Larsen is the founder of Carbon Gap, which is an NGO that is highlighting the difference between where we are and where we should be. He was the lead drafter of the famous Oxford Principles on Carbon Removal and the Guide for Carbon Removal of the World Economic Forum. I had a sneak preview on his presentation, and I'm really, really excited that you will be able to listen to him. So Eli, give it up for Eli Mitchell-Larsen.
Good morning, welcome. Great to see everybody here to speak about the story of carbon dioxide removal. So I'm Eli Mitchell-Larsen. I'm a co-founder of Carbon Gap. I'm currently working as a climate fellow at Stripe Climate, and I'm also a researcher at the Oxford Net Zero. But today I'm speaking to you in my personal capacity. And what I thought I would do is try to walk us through very rapidly the story of carbon dioxide removal. Really, way back in time, our history as a species of interacting with carbon as something that we move around. The period of time, the carbon removal awakening, where we started to think of carbon removal as something we could do for the climate. The state of carbon removal today, where are we? And then finally, some challenges for the future and some hopefully provocative ideas to get us excited and moving into the panel. So first, let's humor me for a moment, and let's go way back in time to where does the story of carbon removal actually begin? Well, okay, long before humans were around, of course, there were organisms like these cyanobacteria, even 1 billion years ago, that were absorbing carbon and building their bodies, some of which persist to this day, proving that permanent, durable carbon removal is possible. But humans really started to wrestle with what was happening with carbonic acid, as it was called, starting in 1856. This is Eunice Foote, possibly the first woman to publish in a scientific journal on physics. She noticed even in 1856 that CO2 concentrations probably would warm the planet, and she postulated that. Much later, some other folks, including Svante Arrhenius, confirmed essentially and restated her hypothesis that if industry continued, we might warm the planet. But they saw this as a good thing. They even talked about evaporation of coal mines. And you know the rest of the story. We can fast forward through it. The Keeling curve helped us see that the concentrations of CO2 were rising. And finally, well, actually in the 80s, the oil and gas companies conducted research which proved that this was happening. And then finally in 1992, we all agreed, okay, this is a problem we need to confront. But we were in parallel moving carbon around from place to place and not really thinking about it as linked to that climate conversation. So even 2,000 years ago, the Romans were using concrete, which uses calcined quicklime to bind aggregate together. So already a way of using carbon to store in the long term for stable building materials. And here's something that I don't think people think about often when we think about carbon removal: submarines. Right? When the first submarines were invented, the submariners were exhaling carbon dioxide, and after a while, they'd suffocate. So submarines had to resurface every day for fresh air. And then when we had nuclear submarines in the 1950s, this changed, because all of a sudden, you could stay undersea for weeks, maybe even months. And so technology needed to be created to take that CO2 out of the air. And actually, the sorbents and solvents that were used on the first nuclear submarines are not so different from what people are using today with direct air capture. So we've had a long history of dealing with carbon, but the kind of link that this was possible as a climate solution came later. And so I just think it's interesting to look at that history of how we thought about carbon. We thought, oh, the ocean will absorb the CO2 for us. Maybe warming is happening, but it'll help. Okay, we can handle 1% CO2 in a submarine. All of these hypotheses were disproven. So just to say that we're always wrong, and we're always biased to the status quo. And so I think that theme will come back as we see where we are today with carbon dioxide removal. So now moving ahead, when was kind of the carbon removal awakening? Because as we were discussing just before this session, we used to talk about carbon sinks, and we had this idea that carbon could be moved out. But it wasn't until folks like some of these people, and this is certainly not exhaustive, started to say, this could be not just something we do to clean up the air in a submarine or to create building materials, but maybe we could use carbon removal at scale to help with this climate change problem. And this was Klaus Lochner in the early 90s, who was probably the first person to articulate that. Other folks I won't go into now, but just to say James Mwangi most recently, I think, contributed to this narrative and basically proposed, carbon dioxide removal isn't just a technological solution in the global north, it's something that's fully participatory and can be incredibly valuable in countries all around the world. So what is carbon dioxide removal? we've known about it for thousands of years, but the formal definition didn't come till much later with the IPCC. So anything that takes CO2 from the atmosphere and durably stores it in a sink, like a geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoir, is carbon removal. And there's a vast array of ways to remove carbon. We talk about the conventional methods like forestation and soil carbon sequestration, and the novel methods like direct air capture, mineralization, ocean alkalinization. And people are coming up with new ways all the time. It's quite an exciting field. And what carbon dioxide removal is not, don't get confused, of course, by these different three-letter C acronyms. It's not the movement of fossil carbon into geological reservoirs. That's carbon capture and storage, another climate solution. It's not necessarily using carbon in products, although sometimes that can be removal if the product persists for millennia. But really, carbon dioxide removal is take anything that takes it from the atmosphere, step one, and stores it somewhere, step two. And the IPCC in around 2018 really put this on the map as, to Stephanie's point actually, it's not enough to just reduce emissions. We need to reach this point of net zero. So however much carbon is coming out, the same amount of carbon needs to be going back into the ground. And so now we can move along to the state of carbon removal today. Where are we? And I think what we had to really grapple with, and this is where my colleagues in Oxford and our work comes in, is what is carbon removal good for? If you're removing carbon somewhere, how do you match that up with an emission or something else that's happening in the world to make some kind of claim that you're making progress on climate? And so we needed to recognize that not all carbon credits are the same, so we needed a taxonomy. And we needed to say that not all net zero states are the same. So bear with me while I try to cover those 2 points. So this was the first Oxford offsetting principles. I was the corresponding author back in 2020. And we basically just said, there's a lot of ways to do things with carbon and generate carbon credits, but we need to divide the world into two halves, emission reductions and carbon dioxide removal. But we need to do another division, which is how long is the carbon stored? Is it short-lived storage or longer-lived storage? And so this was the attempt to kind of help break down what are all these different types of carbon projects. And then secondly, we needed to say, there are infinite possible states that are net zero, but which one are we aiming for? Because if we're digging up fossil carbon, fossil fuels from the geosphere, and we're planting trees, on the one hand, that's good, but on the other hand, we're just moving the carbon from one location to another. And so the insight that we tried to put forward first in this WEF brief and later in Nature Climate Change was, we need to balance the biosphere, the short-lived carbon cycle, in and of itself. So the carbon coming out of the biosphere needs to be matched with carbon going back into the biosphere. And the long-term carbon cycle, which we so disastrously disrupted with our use of fossil fuels, needs to be balanced in and of itself. So if we're taking carbon out of the solid earth in fossil fuels, we need to be putting just as much carbon back into the solid earth. So it's not enough to cross the spheres, as it were. We need to balance each sphere on its own. And this gets to a really important quality of carbon removal that you've probably all heard of, permanence, or durability maybe. So how long does the carbon, once removed, stay in a safe and stored state? And we tried to introduce a difference between permanence, which is basically how long does it last? And nothing is permanent, right? A forest could last forever, a geologically stored pocket of CO2 could last forever, but they're always at some risk. And so we try to use the term durability to capture this idea that every stored carbon has a risk of reversal, and we have to protect it from being re-released after we've stored it. And now I'm going to share a few quick slides from the state of carbon dioxide removal, which is a great resource if you want to get up to speed on all the different forms of carbon removal and where we are today. So on the novel methods, which are the new technologies, which we'll hear a little bit about in the panel, the plans for what's called BECCS and DACCS, so bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, and direct air capture with carbon and storage, are impressive. We're scaling new technologies relatively quickly, but it's still kind of a drop in the bucket. And plans of up to 100 million tons of CO2 per year by 2030 are laudable, and it would be great if we can get there. But we actually need to be getting to the billions of tons stage. And if we look at how much carbon removal we've actually completed, how much carbon have we taken out of the air and stored? This is just looking at just the past couple years on the conventional side, so things like forestation, soil carbon sequestration. You can see that we've done maybe we're doing on the order of 10 to 20 million tons of carbon per year. And of course, this is a drop in the bucket towards matching our emissions, which is why reducing our emissions as far as possible is really the first step. But then when you go over to the novel carbon dioxide removal methods, the technologies, the kind of new ideas, the amount that's been actually delivered is in the tens of thousands of tons. It's very, very tiny. And if you look at the purchasers of this carbon removal, which are mainly these quite wealthy tech companies like Microsoft, we're seeing quite a lot of growth in those purchases, but actually only 4% of these carbon credit pre-purchases have been delivered. That is to say, these companies have paid for the carbon removal, but then it takes some time for those companies to actually make good on that promise. And so we have to watch that as well, that we're not getting too far ahead of ourselves. And so I want to turn now to, hopefully that gives you a little bit of a picture of kind of where we came from as a field and where we are today. And now I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the kind of current questions and challenges with carbon removal. And there are a lot of them, and we can't talk about them all. You know, there's this critical question about mitigation deterrence. Are we concerned that maybe our ability to remove carbon might undermine the emission reduction efforts that we're seeing all around us at Change Now and elsewhere, which we do not want, of course. We can ask, you know, how will the trading work between different countries? And there's significant progress being made at the UN level on that point. We can talk about energy accounting. So there's progress in all these questions, but it's quite a daunting list, right? I just want to focus on one question. Who pays for it? Because we've been putting carbon into the atmosphere for decades, centuries, even millennia. And to take it back out costs money. And we're not used to paying for that. And so far, we have kind of one way of paying for it, which is somebody comes up with a way to remove carbon, someone else buys a carbon credit. And that's great, and that's been what's allowed us to get this initial scaling off the ground. But I want to challenge us to think, how else could we get the world and society, because it's really a global project, to pay to deliver net zero and eventually net negative emissions, hopefully to be able to bring temperatures back down? So I'm going to give you 5 quick ideas, and hopefully that's food for thought and a launch into the excellent panel that you'll hear in just a few minutes. So the first idea is, what if we could get people to pay for something that they want and need? I don't really necessarily need a carbon credit. Okay, there might be some people that want to try to maybe offset a flight or some emissions that they have, but most people don't really need or want this intangible thing that is a carbon credit. But you know what people need? They need building materials that are safe and secure, that could be enriched with recycled cement and CO2. They need higher crop yields, which is something that potentially biochar and enhanced rock weathering could help farmers achieve. And so if we can actually link the payment for this service to a product or something that people want and have the carbon credit be a co-benefit, I think that's an interesting and compelling pathway to pursue in today's world where we're seeing a lot of attention waning from climate as a kind of moralizing and soul issue. Second, I'm really interested in this question of who can afford to pay for carbon removal. In climate, we usually talk about the polluter pays. Whoever emits the carbon, all right, they're the ones that have to clean it up. It's a simple concept. It's like your kid asking them to clean up their room. I'm going to say that it's maybe had its day. It makes sense for some forms of pollution, but I think that what we really should be asking is, who has the ability to pay? Because companies have very distinct levels of profits. Actually, I should have shown this slide first. We'll go back to that in a second. So we did a study a few years ago that basically said, for each company, how much profits do they deliver for every ton of CO2 they emit? It's the opposite of emissions intensity. It's saying, how much carbon do you emit for every dollar or euro that you make? And it turns out that a small segment of technology, finance, and consulting companies make tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of euros for every ton of CO2 they emit. So can they afford 300 euros per ton for high durability carbon removal? I'd say so. As a percentage of their profits, it's minuscule. On the other hand, up to 85% of the emissions come from companies that have profits of only tens of euros per ton of CO2. So even if they dedicated all their profits to carbon removal, they couldn't afford some of these new solutions. And that's where we think about this idea of what's their theoretical ability to pay. And this gets into some of the themes I think we talk about at Change Now, where we think about the boardroom, we think about the corporate culture. And really our jobs inside of corporations are to fight to make the realized willingness to pay of a company closer to its theoretical ability to pay. So I just want to point out that we could be asking more of industries that actually aren't burping out as much carbon as others. And this also has some sort of progressive political implications as well, because of course, in our society, the ability to pay for things is concentrated in certain places. And so ultimately, the story of carbon removal is going to be, do we have the political bravery to take and mobilize the money where it is to pay for carbon removal and stop this kind of myopic thinking of, well, if you emitted the carbon, if it came out of your car, if it came out of your factory, you've got to pay. Well, there's other places in society where we can get those funds. Third, we need to think about maximizing the combined power of public spending, government spending, and private spending. And there's often this tension at play where governments, the French government, the UK government will say, let's get the voluntary carbon market to pay as much money as we can for carbon removal, and we'll just come in to bridge the difference. And likewise, we get the companies waiting and seeing how much subsidies are going to be at play. So this is another point of tension where both parties are hoping the other is going to get this done. And so we have to sort of think our job is to maximize the total amount of money that both our governments and our private sector can put forward towards carbon removal. Fourth, we need to think about changing or considering creative ways of thinking about which emissions are being compensated for. Stephanie reminded me in a conversation yesterday that, of course, we have one atmosphere. If you emit carbon in one location or you remove carbon in one location, it doesn't really matter. It's all the same shared atmosphere. But we're humans, and we have accounting systems that we use to attribute specific emissions against specific removals. And that gets into this idea of when you remove a ton of carbon, which carbon are you removing? Are you removing the earliest carbon that society emitted, the oldest carbon, or are you emitting the most recent carbon? It's actually a choice. And so I would say that as we build up, you can see this red curve. It's a stylized depiction of the European Union's carbon debt. So each year that we're emitting carbon and not sucking all of it out of the air, we're accumulating a debt that we will ultimately have to repay if we want to meet the climate goals that we've all agreed on. And so it might sound a little wild, but we have the option of saying, okay, there are some emissions that nobody is responsible for. They're not tied to a specific company, and they're maybe not even occurring in the specific sovereign territory of a country. I'm thinking of things like methane clathorates in the ocean, or maybe some international shipping emissions. Imagine if we had a fund from philanthropists and governments and individuals that said, let's pay to remove these orphan emissions. No one else is going to raise their hand and take responsibility for these emissions. So if we connected carbon removal against them, we'd actually be doing the opposite of mitigation deterrence. We'd be saying, I'll take care of this. Those other emissions that other people will take more clear attribution for is their responsibility. So I think it's time to get creative about whose emissions we're removing. And fifth and finally, before we hand over to our ABLE panel, I want to introduce an idea that is the current focus of my work and research as a Striped Climate Fellow, which is the idea of embedding carbon dioxide removal into our industrial processes as the default way of doing something. I'll give the example of building waste. When you tear down a building, you do asbestos surveys, you do all these rules, it's heavily regulated. Why isn't there one more rule that just says, oh yeah, also crush up the concrete, absorb a bit of carbon before you put it in the landfill? Nobody would blink. The cost of building demolition would go up by a minuscule percentage, no carbon credits, no complicated questions with Louis Vuitton or Microsoft to get those carbon credits. It's done. The industry just absorbs that new specification and they manage to it. Same thing with wastewater treatment. Billions and billions of cubic meters of water are processed in our wastewater facilities. We deacidify them before they go into the rivers. Why aren't we using carbon-removing materials like limestone to do that? And again, it could just be one more rule in the city of Paris or the French wastewater specifications. It doesn't have to be this extra climate credit that we're having to convince somebody to part with their hard-earned money for. It can just be one more rule in the list of the way that society has chosen to do things. So, here we go again. Just to close, these are not things that have happened. I'm dreaming here, but I'm just painting a picture for you of how the 5 ideas that I've just given might be able to come together. You can imagine the EU or Amazon Web Services using carbonized building materials to build their data center. You can imagine using wastewater alkalinization in their water cooling system. And you can imagine the EU saying, hey, every new data center you want to build, well, guess what? It's going to have to be carbon negative because you're making so much money off this stuff, right? The profits per ton are off the charts. What might be the result of this kind of complicated series of events? Well, your Netflix subscription might go up from $5.99 a month to $7.99 a month. And that just shows you the kind of immense flexibility that we have in some sectors and industries in our society to actually pay and get this stuff moving. Thank you so much for your attention today. I hope this was interesting. And over to the panel. Thank you.
You coming with? You coming with? Okay. I'm sorry? Yeah. You coming with? Just a second? Okay. Another one. No, they just come on the stage. Yeah, and this is Catherine. If you move on, Catherine, come over here. Okay. Okay, welcome to the next part, to our panel. We have Catherine Barnard. We have Thomas Bladier.
Hello.
And Axel Renaud with us. Very
Hello.
happy to have you. We have 3 CEOs, in fact. We will hear about your companies. And let me kick off by words from Paul Polman. He was just on stage, an icon in the corporate sustainability space. In his book, he says, there are 2 things the world needs now more than anything else. It's leaders and trees. So, Catherine, you are the CEO of a company called the World Land Trust. Tell us about it. What are you doing?
Thank you, Stephanie. So the World Land Trust is a company, but actually we're a non-profit. We are based in the UK. And what we do is we work with partners around the world to help them to protect and restore their land for nature, to safeguard nature and climate, so biodiversity and climate. We have a slightly different model in that we act as equal partners with our partners around the world, and we help them to do what they think is the right thing to do to protect nature. So our starting point is environmental and social justice. And there was interesting points earlier thinking about who pays for all of this. I think there's no mention about who pays at the moment for the impacts of climate change, which is overwhelming the world's poorest. So we work by bringing together people from developed countries who are wealthier to provide the funding to support the local actions necessary to protect climate and biodiversity. To date, we have protected more than 1.3 million hectares of land. Together with others, that's over 5 million by working with other organizations. And by being really careful about where we place these interventions, we've protected over 13 million hectares of land so far, which connects areas that are protected to ensure that wildlife can travel between these areas and wildlife is persistent.
That's wonderful. Catherine, tell us, what does climate have to do with nature?
I think that's a great question. I think that one of the things that is often missed, I think was Eli's presentation was great, but there was very little mention of nature and what nature does for us. At the end of the day, this planet is going to continue to exist long after we as a species are gone. This planet does not need humans, but humans need a habitable planet. We will not have a habitable planet if we do not protect the ecosystems upon which we all depend, those ecosystems which put clean air into the atmosphere, that protect watersheds, that ensure that when we get heavy rain, those people aren't killed by landslides or flooding, the mangroves that provide disaster risk reduction for storm surges. Without nature, none of this happens. We can live in a dystopian future like Blade Runner, where we will live in megacities, or we can live in a future where we have to create everything ourselves, or we can take advantage of the world we have at the moment, which actually provides us with everything we need. Nature's essential for any way forward to ensure that we have a habitable future for humans.
Thank you so far. Thomas, you are the CEO of Oklima.
Yes, correct.
And let me kick you off with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. What we are doing to the forests of the world is but a mirror reflection of what we are doing to ourselves and to one another. How are the forests in Europe? What are we doing to them?
Bad. Forests in Europe are sick. They are sick of climate change. You know, trees are living beings like us. And maybe they are more advanced than us in suffering from the climate. And in Europe, we had a lot of heat wave those last years. And it turns out, to manage heat, trees do like us, transpiration, meaning that trees are losing water in order to survive the heat wave. And that weakens them. They are in a kind of water stress, and that makes them much more fragile against sickness or insects that used to live with them during millennia and now are killing them. So we see hectares of forest being destroyed every year by thousands of hectares. In addition to that, the climate is going to change until the 20 or 30 coming years, whatever we do now. And we know that the forests of Europe are not fit to the coming climate. 1 in 6 hectares of forest in Europe has to be renewed by human. You know?
By when?
By human beings.
Yeah, by when? What's the timeline?
By 2050. Mm-hmm. And the forests have managed changes of climate for millions of years, you know? Oaks should grow where the climate fits them. And they evolve with the climate. But now, the climate is changing too quickly. So forests cannot adapt alone, and we have to help them. And that is what we do at Oklima. We help forest owners become kind of the steward of this ecosystem that are so helpful for us by restoring the forest and planting new forest. And we don't work also only with forest owners. We do work also with farmers, because soil is a very, very powerful carbon sink. It has been demonstrated that if you store in the soil 0.5%, if you increase the quantity of carbon stored in soil by 0.5% each year, you solve climate change. Because soil can be a real sponge for carbon. And that rely a lot on the way farmers work. So we help them manage the soil in a different way that will make soil better living, regenerative, and to store carbon in it. And hopefully we find corporation help to fund that, because of course that costs money. And corporation do that either as a contribution to climate that has to come in addition to the reduction effort that they make, or companies do that because those forest owners, those farmers, are in the value chain. And it's a way for them to contribute to lowering their indirect carbon emission.
Let me say hi to Axel Renault. You're the CEO and founder of Net Zero. And I'm happy that you're here, actually, and not
very happy to be here.
Drinking champagne. Why would you be drinking champagne?
Yeah, I've been drinking a bit too much champagne the last couple of days. Net Zero is a company that does carbon removal in the global south. We basically leverage photosynthesis, plants that capture carbon, and then we stabilize the carbon in crop residues. And this carbon, we bring it back to the soils, the agricultural soils, helping improve the yields by anywhere between 20 and 50% yield increase, and storing carbon for thousands of years, and so removing carbon from the atmosphere. The solution is called biochar, and it happened that a couple of days ago, we were awarded one of the 4 winners of actually the largest incentive prize in history that was launched 4 years ago for carbon removal solutions. So that's the champagne part.
The X Prize. Congratulations, everyone. Woo! So who among the audience could explain what biochar is exactly? Hands up. Okay. Okay,
maybe
I think we need you. We need your help now. Please educate us.
So no, I'm going to do the quick version. But so biochar is a product that seemingly, when you look at it, looks a bit like charcoal. And so as I was saying, it is carbon that is extracted from biomass, generally speaking. When you have, either trees or, crop residues like straws, like leaves, like pretty much any vegetal thing has about half of its weight is carbon, dry weight. And this carbon was extracted from the atmosphere through the photosynthesis process that we've all learned. What happens is nature has a short carbon cycle. So plants grow, they capture CO2, and then they are digested, they burn, they decay, and the carbon goes back into the atmosphere. And this has been going on, it was a stable state until mankind found a great idea to say, let's take more carbon that is stored quite deep and put it in the atmosphere. And so what is biochar is a process where you heat at high temperature without oxygen, this biomass, and you extract the carbon in a form that is pretty much indestructible. And as I was saying, this is a product that then can be made of good use, mixing it with the soils. So not only you remove carbon from the atmosphere, and you move the carbon from the short cycle to the long millennia or millions of years cycle, but you also help agriculture. So this is biochar. It's a product that has been empirically known by mankind for thousands of years, but that has been kind of rediscovered by science a few decades ago. It's validated by IPCC, and the whole challenge is how to bring this solution at scale. And we do that in the tropics because that's where you have the biggest impact for local populations, farmers who are the most impacted by climate change, have the least ability to adapt, and are the least responsible for climate change.
So everybody wins.
Exactly. And I think that's, referring to what was said before, it's not just about removing carbon, it's creating value out of this carbon, in this case, agricultural value. And you change people's life when you say to a farmer, small farmer in Cameroon, where we are, or in Brazil, growing coffee, you increase your yield by 30%. This is life-changing for them. So it's really making good use of what is a pollution today and making it good use of it by leveraging it for agriculture.
We need to talk about money. Eli was already introducing that topic. Catherine, where does the money come from in your case?
So in our case, the money for the work that we support with our partners comes from multiple sources. We get a lot of philanthropy. So as part of what World Land Trust does, we exist as a partnership between the people who care and don't know what to do because it's all too big. How do we address the climate and extinction crisis? What can I do? And the people on the ground who know what to do. And I think actually, Agasor's example of biochar is quite a good example of actually, we used to know how to do this. We mustn't forget that some of this indigenous knowledge and some of the local knowledge is out there. Let's not go inventing the wheel again when actually sometimes we know what to do. So we get the money from connecting these people who know what to do with the people who care and don't know what to do. So most of it's philanthropic, but we do sell carbon credits which are created from some of our partners' projects where they're driven primarily by the environmental justice and biodiversity impact, but carbon credits provide a mechanism to which they can actually achieve those. It provides that long-term sustainability. And those are bought from a variety of our corporate partners who, with us, we insist that they go on a journey of reducing first. So it's the last step of that mitigation hierarchy. So they have to go through that reduction step first. So as this session is called Reduce, Reduce, Remove. They have to go through that reduce. They have to reduce their emissions. By working with us, they then help to also reduce deforestation and habitat change. And by enabling degraded forests to restore, you can remove carbon. And then I would just add 2 R's to it as well, actually, whilst I've got the microphone, is we also need to think about resilience. I talked at the beginning about the importance of nature. Nature provides us with this resilience. We need that resilience in there so that these great mechanisms like biochar, they need to stay. We need the natural systems to persist to enable this to continue. And I also think we need to add a last R, which is repair. We have the best tool at the moment that actually works. We know this stores carbon, which is natural habitats. We need to repair what we've got. And I think that we mustn't lose sight of that. I worry that, as Eli said, people focus on the new shiny thing that's out there, these new technologies. And I thought that graph was instructive about the new technologies which show who are the big buyers. Microsoft, Google. You've got these white male tech bros who are deciding what the exciting new shiny thing is.
Yeah.
No one is looking at what is it we know that exists already. What is it that the most disadvantaged people in this planet are actually struggling with on a day-to-day basis that we can support them in doing that?
Because sometimes I wonder, do they trust a shiny new toy more than nature? Nature
Yes,
has been
they
around
do.
for 4 billion years.
They
and
ignore it
nature
because they
knows
know
what to
it.
do.
Nature's been around and they ignore it because they don't make money from it. Nature is externalized. The costs of nature are externalized in the markets. So you look at, there's a groundbreaking report done by Professor Kailash Gupta for the UK government, I think about 3 years ago, showing that nature has been systematically ignored from all of the accounting principles. So all of these costs are easy. They can pass the costs on to somebody else. No one has considered actually part of the solution's already there. And these tech pros are just looking, oh, it's a new shiny thing, it's all exciting, if we could do this. And they go ahead and they think, oh, we can probably make money from it. And they're not thinking about, what can we do now? We need to act at scale and at speed. We're not acting at that.
We have to put nature on the balance sheet and understand what nature capital is. But let's be pragmatic, Axel. You have been working for the Boston Consulting Group for a long time. You know corporates. What do they need to do? What should be your ideal strategy in a company to reduce, but also to remove? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes there's a bit of an opposition, should we reduce or should we remove? And, remove sometimes is seen as kind of greenwashing. Science is very clear. IPCC has been very clear for decades. We need first to reduce. We need to reduce by 80 to 90% our emissions. There's no way out, okay? And this is the target in 2050, okay? But IPCC is also very clear. There will be remaining emissions from agriculture, from some hard-to-abate industrial processes, and so on. And so we also need to remove about 10 gigatons per year, okay? 10 gigatons, for many people, it's a bit kind of blurry how many zeros, but 10 gigatons is about the double in weight of what the oil and gas industry combined extract every year, just to give you an idea of the scale of what is needed. And so it's not opposing reduction and removal, we really need to do both. Now, corporates, they also need to do both individually. So everyone should have a net zero trajectory. The corporates, and there are many of them in the SBTi standards, that are taking those kind of commitments. And depending on their starting situation, maybe it's easier to reduce, maybe it's easier to remove, and actually there should not be just one way. We need companies that go the reduction, because otherwise basically we're doomed. There will never be a net zero scenario. The temperature will continue to rise. But we also need companies today to start removing, because they need to fund the building of the removal industry. The removal through trees, we've mentioned a lot, through land, but also through engineered methods. And we should not oppose one with another. We need everything. The scale of what we are trying to do is just humongous. And it's not just one solution that will win. It will be all the nature-based solutions, all the nature plus technology solutions, like what we do, and all the pure high-tech solutions. They come with advantages and drawbacks, different degrees of maturity, but we need to manage this as a portfolio. We can't bet on one solution, and there's no one solution that will get us out of the climate crisis.
Thomas, why is it so difficult to explain what we are doing? Why do we have to say it over and over again? Why isn't it obvious for everyone? What's the feedback that you get from investors, partners, customers?
Yeah, I really feel we have to do this education. And it's not only by telling things, it might be also by showing it. So that's why at Oklima we want to bring the collaborators, the people of the company that fund the project, to see the project, to discuss with the farmer. Because when you have this farmer who tells you, you know, I cannot blame my fathers and grandfathers who managed the soil the way they did it, but I want to leave it in a better situation to the next generation to come. So that's why I am handling this soil management practice in order to store carbon, but also to restore soil quality. And when it comes to education, I'm always split, you know, because on the one hand, we do not want to fuel climate anxiety, and on the other hand, we need to show people, and we all need to feel what's really going to happen. I mean, it's incredible to have this 50-degree truck here, you know, to feel what does it mean. Because to me, 1.5 degree, 2 degree, 4 degree, I do not understand what it means. The moment for me that was a turning point is when I saw this map. It's a world map, and I ask, why have you put India and Pakistan in red and other parts of the world, like in Africa? And they tell me, Thomas, these are the places where human beings will not be able to live in 30 to 50 years from now if we continue this way. That was the turning point for me.
Axel, we need to end on a positive note. Please give us something we can do that everybody can do in the audience. What's your message? What can we do tomorrow?
Well, I think the first thing is to really take this for real. You know, it's been, you know, the climate thing has been a lot of talks. I remember I was at the Rio conference in 1992, and everything was already on the table. And since then, globally, we've procrastinated. You know, we've done lots of talks, not a lot of action. So I think individually now, it's really a time to act. So those of you in corporations, well, make sure that those corporations build net zero roadmaps. Those of you who are, a bit more adventurous, start companies, trying to help with the problem. I think it's not about just saying, okay, degrowth is going to solve the thing. Degrowth is not going to solve the thing. It's going to be new things, new ways of doing things, smarter ways of doing things. And I think that the good lesson is, but if you think about, clean energy and renewable energy, it is much more efficient, including from a cost standpoint, than to drill oil and burn oil.
Yeah.
And so we need to invent the ways to do what we do in a better way, And I think there's a field of inventions, that is just staggering. We're just at the beginning of this phase, and everyone should feel, they should contribute, whether they're, in engineering, in product design, in marketing. We need to reinvent pretty much everything we've been doing it the low carbon way.
And isn't that a great privilege to be in this generation that can reinvent the world?
Exactly, it is. It
Axel,
can be. Some people are kind of worried. But everyone should be extremely positive. Should say, okay, we need to reinvent the world so that it works better the zero carbon way. I mean, that's quite a project.
Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you to this wonderful panel. I think you can leave. Thank you. So now I'm waiting for a household name in CDR. I can see her already. It's Leila Connors. Are you coming on stage? You want to give it up for Leila Connors. Hello, so good to see you. You don't have a mic. And maybe some water for Leila. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Leila. So good to have you here.
Thank you.
You're a filmmaker. You're the president of your own company, Tree Media. And maybe some of you went to see your movie Legion 44 last night, or a while ago, The 11th Hour and Eyes on Fire, both with Leonardo DiCaprio. Well, thanks for being here. I think we can show a trailer of Legion 44. Is that possible? Can I ask? Are you showing that trailer now? Yes? Okay, so you can have a sneak preview. It's online if you want. You can see the movie. I highly recommend it.
We are no longer able to go beyond what we are suffering now.
It's something so uncontrollable that's eating your community up.
So we are suffering from the same problem.
We need to stop putting CO2 into the atmosphere. But once it's already in there, carbon removal is one of the few tools that directly addresses that cause of suffering.
So carbon dioxide removal is the act of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and putting it away at a time scale that is impactful for climate.
We've built a direct air capture facility that actually removes carbon from the air and permanently sequesters it into concrete.
I go to work every day with 13 Kenyans who are really motivated to solving the greatest problem of our time.
Human ingenuity is something that I would bet on every single day.
Carbon removal needs to happen. It's not a question of like, can we do this? We must do this. We must find a way.
I'm a big fan of algae. I think they quite literally will save the world.
We as human beings need to be continuously searching for opportunities to solve this issue of climate change, to really try and make an impact. I think we'll succeed.
With the journey we started, it's very ambitious to do it, but we're on track.
How do we bring in industries that use energy and will give the license to develop everything as quickly as possible?
Sarcasm, sequestering it, and using it as the kryptonite for carbon.
There are policies and stakes that are being put in place of like, here's what we want to see with carbon removals.
Scientists have known that this is possible for a really long time. One of the ways to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, which is the weathering of rocks.
So it's a win-win situation for growers.
Biochar has so many different applications. One big bag, 1.5 tons of CO2.
A nature-based solution to grow microalgae for the purpose of carbon sequestration.
We need to stop just talking about it. We need to take a real action.
If you want to go really fast, you want to go together.
We better get it right in the first place because we really don't have a second shot here.
All hands on deck.
Okay, thank you. Lila, before we talk about the movie, let me run you through 3 big names.
Okay.
Names who have been important in your life and in other people's lives. The first is, surprisingly actually, Mikhail Gorbachev. What's the connection?
Well, Mikhail Gorbachev is the reason why I'm in the space in the first place. My background's in international politics and economics, and when I had a front row seat to the end of the Cold War in the think tank that I was in, and when Gorbachev emerged and he said, once we solve the problem between the Soviet Union and the United States, and we don't have to get into what happened after that, but the next problem is the environment. And so when I heard that, he had called for the green helmets. I don't know if anyone remembers that era. And the first Rio rounds were happening. And that's when I got activated. I listened to what he was saying, and I started working on the environment in general. And then this was in, the early 90s, and then climate soon thereafter.
And let me remind you, as a German, I know his quote, life punishes those who come too late.
Correct.
This is true once more. My next name, of course, on the list is Leonardo DiCaprio. Tell us about him.
Well, he was back just before Inconvenient Truth happened. Leonardo had met Al Gore, and also we were, as I said with Gorbachev, Tree Media existed to tell the pressing stories of our time, because mainstream media wasn't, as far as we were concerned, doing enough of that kind of storytelling. Leo had seen what we did with Woody Harrelson, and he came to us over 20 years ago and said, I'd like to talk about the environment. And the 11th Hour was the first project we did together where we just investigated the state of the world, the state of the oceans, the state of water, and all of those things. And this was in 2002. And at that time, everybody across all of these different métiers said that climate was impacting their area of study. And so that's when we turned all of those interviews that were actually meant for his website. It was really meant to just be discussions with scientists around the state of the world. And then we said, wow, it's actually not so much the state of the world, it's the state of humanity and how we interface with the world. And that's how we started that journey.
There was also a movie with him called Biomimicry. What do we need the word biomimicry for?
Well, biomimicry is an interesting one. Inside 11th Hour, we interviewed about 70 scientists. One of my favorite people in that movie was Janine Benyus, who some of you might be aware of. She created a framework called biomimicry, which really is looking at nature's operating instructions to create materials and design protocols. And basically the concept is nature exists here on Earth using materials production at room temperature in water with no pressures. So, for example, a spider web is 10 times stronger ounce for ounce than steel, and the spider can eat a bug in its belly at room temp, create this material, whereas if we do steel, it's like high temperatures, high pressures, chemical baths, and things like that. So how can we mimic nature to create our materials and sort of sit inside what we call the carbon cycle, or sit inside the natural cycles of the Earth?
So learn from Mother Earth.
Yeah, and
that is your message.
Correct, and we still want to do a big feature on that. We did a short with Leo helped us fund that to sort of bring that forward, and that little short did really well, actually. It has circled the world many times since we made it.
I have a third name for you. Unfortunately, it's Donald Trump. You come from LA. You used to live in Paris. What's your view on what's happening in the United States?
Well, my message to people who are not American is I actually left Los Angeles in the pandemic and moved to upstate New York, and I live in the woods. And I interfaced with a lot of MAGA people. And what I came to understand is we don't really know what's happening on the interior of the United States, which is basically collapsing in many ways that most Europeans might not understand. And there's a lot of pain and suffering that most people don't understand. And that is what is sort of an inward turning. The Americans are looking inward and trying to fix some of these problems that they think he will help them fix, which is, mortality is, our life expectancy is dropping, maternal death at birth is going up, literacy rates, it's pretty bad. Fentanyl deaths are a real thing. So it's more about domestic issues and not really being able to engage in the world in the way that maybe America had from a German perspective, perhaps after the end of the war. I don't see a lot of people in the hinterlands of America wanting to do that anymore.
What does that mean for climate and nature?
Well, it means that there are a lot of people inside America that still care very deeply about climate and nature, and I think it moves to messaging that's not so moralizing and more practical, because a lot of these people actually like nature, but they don't like to be moralized about it. So they like conservation. They like other words than the word carbon. I'm worried about carbon because they don't like the association with climate, but they do like nature. I do see other countries stepping up. I also don't see America entirely backing away from this issue. It's just a matter of metabolizing this problem that we're having into leadership that needs to rise. I was just talking to Eli, who spoke earlier. This is a moment where we need to figure this out and find our way through this, through leadership, creativity, and leveraging the pathways of financing that are available, which are still there.
What have you learned about the narrative? I always struggle. How can I explain what is going on without scaring people away, without underrating what is happening? How can we explain what's going on? How can we find allies? It's climate and nature and social and everything all at once.
Well, I think we're all here for a reason, and I think we have to step forward and take leadership in the places where we can, we have purchase, where you can. So if in your community, what is the community doing? Does it have an opportunity for renewables? Does it have an opportunity to do CDR? We actually have to move beyond messaging to actual action on the ground, which is why for Legion 44, we're showing a lot of young engineers who've stepped forward to create pathways for removal. We do have a problem in terms of the rate of injection of CO2 into the atmosphere, right? If you just look like tunnel vision at that, it looks quite scary. But also, we do have decarbonization pathways. We do have defossilization pathways. It's about scale and mobilizing capital. At this point, I think we know, the way I like to refer to it is we need to put civilization's economy inside the carbon cycle. We actually know how to do that. It's just a money question. And I heard Eli talk about the creativity about how to get there through money, but that is pretty much our sole focus, should be how to mobilize capital, create markets, create materials, create products that put human civilization inside the carbon cycle, and then I don't think it becomes a political issue anymore. Because you're talking about innovation, you're talking about jobs and all of that thing. And the one thing I learned in doing Ice on Fire, one of the scientists actually in Germany, I forgot her name at the moment, but she said, look, there's no point in worrying about it anymore. We understand what's going on. Now it's all about creativity, implementation, action, funding, all of those things. That's really all we should focus on. Don't worry about, the storm around you. Don't be off-put by what's happening.
What gave you hope when you did Legion 44 on carbon removal?
Well, what I love about Legion and what that was about is the spontaneous emergence of a lot of young people around the world. It's pretty instantaneous. So in the sense, in sort of geologic time, if you think about it, all of a sudden, everyone has come to the table with some of these pathways. And yes, some of them may or may not survive, in terms of funding, but humanity, it's sort of like an immune response. Humanity is having an immune response to this problem. I think we're going to fix it. The only questions I really have are, the funding. And so the hope is, or what gives me hope is that we figured it out. I do believe that.
Who are the important players? I understand there's a lot going on in Europe.
Yes. Well, I would say Germany is extremely important. Denmark is very important. Singapore is becoming important. Luxembourg actually may be important in terms of funding.
Tiny Luxembourg.
Luxembourg is doing a big screening of our film, and they're looking at perhaps being a financial hub. Singapore also. There are different parts of the world inside the United States that may be on the back heel right now, but I know they're ready to push forward once things become a little clearer. So in terms of companies, you have the DAC with Climeworks, but you also have Net Zero with biochar that just won the X Prize. We have Mati Carbon that's doing enhanced rock weathering. We have Lithos. There's a lot of companies that are going to get to the
maybe you need to explain enhanced rock weathering.
It's crushed rocks on land where it can help the farmers make their land alkaline and also remove carbon.
So rock has always absorbed carbon.
Yes.
But you can accelerate it now.
Yes, when you crush it and create more surface area. And there's different things that people are doing with some how you deal with the rocks before you apply it.
You consider yourself a leader in impact media. What impact have your films had on society or the community? What do you think? Are you happy with the impact?
Yes. I mean, the way that impact media works is very hard to know what exact impact you have. It's not something, although with Legion 44, we have something called Watch and Remove, where you can watch the movie and remove carbon, so we'll have more one-to-one. And we watch the movie, this is how much carbon was removed. But 11th Hour, Ice on Fire, all of these things have put what we call a log on the fire of the climate movement. And people anecdotally have told me we founded, whole I guess Namibia founded their first, environmental nonprofit because of 11th. We saved a giant forest in Canada because of 11th. Ice on Fire helped mobilize capital in the methane area. So it's the story. Like I like to say, stories shape our world. If you don't have the story, you won't have the industry. And so if you're in a space of communication, obviously this is absolutely critical if we want to move, into the next stage of, again, civilization inside the carbon cycle. That's really, how do we create that? How do we talk about it? It's not entirely, in my view, enough of that storytelling to really, obviously, get everyone on side. So we need more of it.
What's next? A movie on biochar?
Yeah, we have a biochar because biochar is so complex. We have a whole movie on biochar. We're doing nature removals because I know a lot of people look at a pipeline and say, how can we do more pipelines and save the world? What about trees? Nature removal is very important, obviously, and that it's such a complex space that we had to create another movie for that. So we're doing, and actually I'd like to mention that the Hopi people of the Southwest contacted us, and they have a message for the world around climate and around the state of the world that we're filming. It's an emergency. So they said we're filming them in September. And so hopefully.
Whoa.
And there goes that.
Okay, what is that? Smile. So, what is this? Okay, maybe somebody is this carbon capture maybe? Carbon removal machine? Okay, we're sorry. We need to end this now.
I think we can end it, yeah.
We have to end it,
yeah.
Shall we? Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you.